Even working, I don't have a proper mic out. So I made a video when Donald Trump got elected because I thought it was a big historical event. And this morning I've woken up to see that Putin and his forces, his Russian forces, have invaded Ukraine, which seems to be quite a big historical event to me. A lot of people saying that this might lead to a third world war or war in Europe. A lot of complicated feelings. I'm not an expert. I'm not here to say, oh, this is how to feel, this is the information. It's just a pure reaction, really. I am interested in history. I'm an amateur historian, I'd say, and I always wonder when you hear about these things, how people reacted at the time, what they thought about things, the context. A lot of this is probably going to be lost in history. I hope and pray that there will be sanctions against Putin and that the violence will stop, because I've just heard on the news that apparently a child has been killed in an apartment strike. I think they were saying that something like 50 Russian troops have died, and they're still working out the number of Ukrainians that have been killed in the attacks. And it feels like it's only going to get worse. And it's strange. It feels like when we first found out about COVID as a big thing, I remember finding out about it, when it first came up, and we thought it wouldn't be that much of a big deal. And then it started getting worse, and then, a lot of people were saying, oh, it won't be that bad, it won't be that bad. And then Boris Johnson started he made the speech, and it felt a bit dreamlike, didn't it? I think we're quite lucky, well, I am anyway, where I'm at. So obviously I'm in England, Kent in England, so south of England. And I'm being very privileged to not have known war or immediate danger like that in my lifetime. And so the first big thing really was COVID. And that felt very dreamlike. It felt like derealization. It felt like it wasn't real. I think a lot of people are still digesting it. But when these things happen, I think people do just sort of go on as usual, as normal. It just becomes normal. Anything becomes normal. Anything just becomes what you're used to, clapping for the NHS. That was surreal, wasn't it? Going to stand outside and clapping and all that stuff now, I think we're all still dealing with. It's quite very complicated. And now this. And I've just got a few things to say about it, really. I'm going to pause this for a moment just to check this is recording, because if it's not, there's no point. Right, so I've just checked it, and this is working, I think. So hopefully it won't be too bad. The sound isn't going to be the best, but, I'm also in the living room rather than my usual setup, because I'm just sitting here watching the news, really. I've got it on in the background. I'm supposed to be doing stuff for my masters, but I can't really come away from the TV. I know that the president of Ukraine he said he's going to update us all every hour on what's going on, and it feels like one of those historical events where you want to be watching exactly what's going on as it happens. So it's really very disturbing. I think I saw this morning on it was very surreal. I started off watching Good Morning Britain, which I don't really like Good Morning Britain very much. I think it's pretty right wing. And you've got Lorraine Kelly, you've got Kate Garraway, kind of in a bit of shock, I think, talking about war potentially breaking out in Europe. The first thing I did when I woke up this morning, I opened my social media, and all the trending tags were Russia, Ukraine, Putin. Palestine was trending as well, which I want to talk about a lot. And I think obviously this is something that will be interesting for historians in the future, the social media reaction to something like this happening, because you've got memes, people that are scared, worried, like all these different human reactions which social media gives us, which we haven't had in any other conflicts here. Really. So there was footage this morning, as soon as I woke up, of a siren going off early in the morning in Ukraine. And very frightening. There have been missile strikes or some sort of airstrikes going on. Pictures of very recent things. Just the idea of the sirens and obviously because Ukraine is somewhere that we would associate in this country as being quite similar to us. So this is another nation that wants to be involved in NATO. This is a country that's a bit like us. To see that happening in Europe, in the democracy. I know that Kate Garraway said something. Let me write it down. I wrote it down, let me tell you. I've been transcribing a lot of what I've seen on the news today, because it feels like it's going to be quite a big deal. I wrote, when I woke up this morning, Russia has invaded Ukraine. A reporter is live showing Ukraine, where there have been missiles across the country. There were sirens this morning. In the east, Ukraine claimed to have killed 50 Russian soldiers, and who knows how many in Ukraine will have been hurt or are afraid. It's frightening and feels unreal, like the start of COVID. Life goes on as usual, but with this in the background, the looming shadow. And as well as those fears and grief and worry, is the knowledge that suddenly now we pay attention, now we jump into action because this is Europe and Russia is our enemy. And so now our wise politicians and leaders suddenly take a stance against invasion and occupation. They suddenly feel the same panic and distress and injustice that those in Palestine, in Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq and Kashmir have felt. But it's all too late. I'm cynical too, because I know so much of this is about power and money, not morality. It's about us and the US and NATO countries, and our alliances and our weapons contracts. It's all capitalism and power, and people are now dying closer and closer to home. I have cried for Palestine and tried in vain to get others here to understand that the people of Palestine, and Israel too, are just like us. Social media has closed the gap. We're all the same, with families, pain, fears, and loves. But people would not listen and would not put themselves and their families in the place of the Palestinians. I think because Israel struck them as more Western, and there is heavy racism and Islamophobia here. Sorry for my scratchy throat. But, I'm just reading that because those are my initial thoughts when I woke up. I'm a writer. I express myself better with writing stuff down rather than just talking to you guys. But I think it's just so much frustration. It's just generally the anger and the despair of war itself, which, some will say that's so naive, but I don't think it is naive. I think that there is no need. So often there is no need for war, because we let it get to a point where it escalates. If we all acknowledged each other as brothers and sisters, if we all acknowledged each other as having the same humanity, forget about being in the West or not, forget about nations, if we all just acknowledged each other as people who just so happen to be born in different places into different cultures, social media's done that for us, and I do have hope because younger people are more able to see this. I certainly think in terms of Israel and Palestine, a lot more young people are able to see it. It doesn't work to say that the Palestinians are these dangerous, terrible, uncivilized individuals like they used to say. That's an old colonial technique from the playbook, isn't it? I mean, they did that to India. It was uncivilized, and suddenly, Israel had to go in there and make it into a civilized place, and we obviously know that's not true. And I use Israel and Palestine as my example because I couldn't believe that yesterday I saw on the news, I believe the US they were contacting the government of Israel to see if they would stand with them in this situation. And I think it just gets to a point where you just think, my gosh, what on earth are we? I mean, obviously Putin is in the wrong. He should not be invading Ukraine. And I think people who are criticizing NATO and those of us who, the countries that are anti-Putin, assume that it's from a standpoint of being pro-Putin. It's not. Putin's Russia is a terrible place. I mean, when you think in particular about, I'm LGBT, I follow a lot of LGBT people from around the world, and the situation there is appalling. I'm no supporter of Putin. I'm also very, very wary of, I think in this instance we're doing the right thing, but I'm wary about why. I'm certainly wary about why. The idea that the US would go to Israel just shows you that the issue isn't occupation. It's not occupation and invasion. We don't enter wars. I mean, let's be honest. We don't enter wars because of morality, to protect innocent people, to prevent occupations and invasions. We have been, in Britain, an invading force, haven't we, ourselves? That's not what we're here for. It's about power, it's about money, it's about capitalism. It's about which parts of the globe we are allies with, who we can control via that. And the very notion that they could go to Israel for this just made me feel like, you always want to laugh with the absurdity. So if you're against occupation, right? You're against occupation and invasion, and you go to it just doesn't make any sense. And the reason I bring that up is because I'm very I try and keep up with what's going on in Palestine, and it's suddenly people have suddenly changed their minds. Suddenly, I remember for a very, very long time, the Palestinian people had obviously been presented as dangerous people, and I think Islamophobia has a lot to do with it. I've been watching a podcast called the Trojan Horse podcast. You've probably heard of it. I'm way behind you guys because I'm trying to catch up with my masters and I'm trying to keep up with it. And it's about a culture of Islamophobia in British society, and what people in power will do because of a fear of Muslims, because of Islamophobia, which is probably the great evil of our time, I think. I certainly think when it comes to Israel and Palestine, the reason why, for some reason, there's two reasons, I think, but the reason why in Britain our politicians tend to support Israel in that situation is that the Palestinian people are mostly Muslim. They're not just Muslims. I mean, there are a lot of faiths in Palestine, but a lot of people there are Muslims. There's lots of mosques, and I think that there is a feeling that's been fostered here in Britain that Muslim religion is, Islam is somehow dangerous. which is ridiculous because we're a country where there is no separation between church and state anyway. You know, we're I could understand if the argument was, you know, church and state shouldn't be together, and it was like a consistent argument, yes, but then in which case it shouldn't just be Muslims, should it, that you've got the problem with? It doesn't make sense. There is a heavy dehumanization of Muslims, and the sense that people who are brown, people who look Muslim or from other parts of the country, other parts of the world as well, they're not like us, they're different. And I think it's why, you know, we would get involved in Afghanistan and Iraq, and we hear about these issues going on, and we don't seem to think about it. You know, you hear about missile strikes in Syria, in Yemen, you hear about these things, you hear about our contribution in Saudi Arabia. And in our minds, we've still got that colonial mindset, you know, that thought process of we're the civilizing force, we're the world police, we are doing this because we have to do this, you know, we're doing right. These are uncivilized people, and you know, just so we know, the reason why this really is brought home to me is because I'm half Indian. My family came from the Punjab. When my dad was 3 when he came over, my grandfather Menga, he worked incredibly hard over here. He toiled and then made a life for himself, was able to bring his family over. And I have a very big mixed family who are Sikh, not necessarily practicing, but, you know. And I know through that, and I wouldn't know if I wasn't mixed, because at school we were taught wonderful things about Churchill, about you know, we weren't actually taught about the British Empire, but we were taught kind of around it, that, you know, oh, you know, we defeated these different people and we brought all these great things. And then obviously to hear the other perspective, which is, you know, the pain that was inflicted on India, the suffering, we'll never know now. We will never know where India could have gone. We had a situation where India had something like 23% of the world wealth or something at that point. I've done this in other videos, I speak about this in other videos, and then by the time the British left, they left them with something like 3%. You know, they totally looted India of all wealth. And now we still look at India and people think, oh, you know, so primitive, so much poverty, and you just don't know what could happen. And also thinking about India, you know, let's not veer off this here. We're thinking about Kashmir, we're thinking about what's going on in India right now against Muslims. We've got another terrible situation. And we do have a part to play in that. We do. Because it's like with partition. You know, when we partitioned, when we divide and conquer people for our own financial gain, our own power, we leave people at war with each other. You know, we had, before we went in there, we did have a lot more solidarity between different religions and a lot more peace. And it created violence, it created resentments. And to this day, you know, we've got the awful, awful situation in Kashmir. It's evil. It's really, really awful. I don't know if you see any of that stuff online. I find it quite hard to watch a lot of that stuff, and it makes me feel very sick to see what's happened to India. So yes, that's the first reason, I think, is that our politicians don't want us necessarily to think about the people abroad as being just like us. Social media's made that difficult for them. But, you know, essentially we are all the same. I don't mean that to erase our differences, but, you know, if you follow people in Palestine right now, they might speak a different language, but we're all just human beings. You know, we're just dealing with our circumstances. That's a wonderful thing the internet's done for us. So there's that. You know, we tend to associate these places abroad with being, oh, it's fine if it happens there as long as the conflict doesn't hit us in the wonderful West. And, you know, I'm not like anti the West or anything, but what I'm saying is the reason why, you know, we always talk about it feels unfair really, because we're talking about, you know, our wealth and how successful we've been and how much human rights and things we have, and you know, I'm very appreciative of those things, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm so grateful to have been born in, you know, to be born here in Britain. I'm incredibly lucky. I wouldn't have these same privileges. I wouldn't even necessarily be able to make these videos if I was somewhere else. But that being said, we also have to acknowledge that other countries we've had a hand in a lot of this trouble, you know. We've held a lot of countries back, we've created a lot of enmities, we've created wars and bloodshed that's caused so many different issues. So for them to us to be like, oh, we're just naturally so dignified. We were just good all along. It's not true. It's just not true, and it's not fair. So they don't want us to, you know, they find it difficult to think about people elsewhere as you know, as these things affecting us. And then the second reason, of course, is that Israel is strategically useful to us. You know, there seems to be this idea that, you know, Israel is somehow controlling us. I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's more of the case that, you know, we created a situation. Let's not forget that, sorry, this isn't a video about this, but let's not forget that before the Holocaust, when Jewish people became refugees in Europe, these people had to flee their homes, out of a very real danger of being killed for something they couldn't help, for their race or their religion. I know that people who weren't religious Jews were still targeted. They were, you know, we were asked to take in people. Would we take in these asylum seekers who are at risk of their lives? And we didn't take enough. the European countries didn't take enough. I think a couple of countries took a decent amount of people. But, you can see that to this day. We owe a debt. We do owe a debt. We do owe a debt of guilt to Jewish people. We do. And now we have played a huge part in this situation in Europe of what's going on with Israel, and therefore the further oppression and pain felt by the Palestinian people who are being ethnically cleansed now. And, it's sad because, you look back at that and you think it wasn't that long ago. And you think about the reaction, it's hard to imagine. Well, it's not really, I guess, if you look at it now. These are Jewish people, fleeing persecution. And now I think any of us looking back would say, of course, we should have taken them. But you look at refugees now, you look at people coming from the Middle East, look at what the media does, right? If these people are Muslim, because this is being, Islamophobia is the thing, isn't it? It's the thing of today. These people aren't human. Oh, they're coming over. Oh, they look a bit old. Oh, only kids, Oh, too many young men. They're dangerous. We don't want them here. They're changing our culture. There's almost a denial of this danger that people are coming from. Sorry again about the appalling sound on this. I know that it's really popping with the P's and stuff, so I can only apologise for that. I don't really want to get my setup out now, really. I've got my master's stuff that I'm doing. I'm just trying to keep watch on what's going on. But yeah, so there's the idea that Israel is more westernised, more like us. There's the pinkwashing of Israel, terrible Muslim people are so awful to LGBT people, and it's just it's a fear, really, isn't it? It's a fear of the Middle East, and also I think there's a valid fear in the sense of we have created so much harm in the world that I think we do kind of live with that looking over our shoulder here in the West. Our leaders do anyway, thinking, gosh, I hope that doesn't come back to bite us. Because if you look at a lot of the terrorism, for example, and the things that we struggle with here, I find it's difficult to articulate because obviously terrorism is a great evil. The killing of innocents is a wicked, wicked thing. Always a terrible crime. It doesn't matter who. Innocent people, civilians being killed is evil. But also what we don't want to talk about is the potential for radicalization and how people could be quite easily manipulated into these sort of actions by the actions of our governments and our history itself. If we put people in a situation where we treat them like they're the background characters in our story, getting involved in Afghanistan, Iraq, and then leaving after in Afghanistan, just leaving the people now, leaving them there. Of course, people in these situations are going to be angry, and they're going to be ripe for radicalization. If you've seen great violence, if you've seen all these terrible things happening, I think just on a human personality level, it's any of us, I think, we would have the potential to be radicalized by that, for sure. And we never want to talk about that, obviously. It's like when people talk about Shamima Begum, for example, and I'm not saying what she did was right. I'm not defending what she did, but what I am saying is she was 15 years old. She was only 15. And she was radicalized. She was essentially radicalized online. It was a whole process. She was selected. She went and she ended up becoming the bride of a much older man. So, there's something really dodgy there as well. She bore his children. All her children died. And the hatred towards Shamima Begum is, people will argue with me on this, I don't believe the same hatred would have been aimed at her if she was a white girl. I think there is a state of adulthood that we assign people of colour, and you see this especially with black and brown men as well, when, like, for example, they're stopped by the police. And we're so concerned with, punishing people like Shamima Begum, rather than actually looking at how we can stop radicalization from happening. I would argue that the Islamophobia which we currently engage in, when we're talking about obviously Muslim terrorism, there's terrorism of many kinds, and we look at we've got a terrible situation of people being radicalized. You've got a lot of very radicalized transphobic people, I find, coming up. You've got obviously you've got white male people who feel I want to make a video on this, by the way. I think there are a lot of young white men who have grown up with not great financial circumstances, who are actually being very harmed by the patriarchy, who probably are quite thoughtful, who probably are very intelligent people. They sense there's a problem. They sense that things aren't fair, and they are then radicalized. This is a normalized form of radicalization. They are radicalized by the top because they know that these individuals have it in them. They feel the injustice very strongly. Like, they know there's a problem. So they're very quick to aim them. Oh, okay, so your enemy is actually immigrant. It's actually the left. It's actually feminists. And so they channel that. which is, I find, is a great shame, because I think a lot of these individuals are actually radicalized. This is probably controversial to say. I think a lot of these individuals become radicalized because they do actually have I think they probably have a deep sense of empathy. I think it gets trained out of them, but I actually think maybe that is controversial to say. I think that the people that they prey on are initially people with a deep empathy, and I think that is used against them, and that is used to radicalise them. But, if you look at what we do in the Middle East, we still cling to the Great Britain myth. We still cling to that now. Sorry, this does link to what I'm saying here, because I've got all these people in shock, all these commentators, all these blue ticks. No offence to the lovely blue ticks out there, but some of them are insufferable. Talking about how shocking and how awful this is for the first time in our lifetime. It's war in Europe, and they're acting shocked, and how could this happen? And my question is, obviously it is shocking. I don't deny it's shocking and terrible, but what I'm saying is we live in a world here where we are capitalist. We don't care about human life. We engage in eugenics regularly. We share a lot of policies. We still go with the whole Britain myth, because of our Second World War experience. But I don't believe, people worship Winston Churchill. He was an incredible racist. He wasn't just a racist, he was a white supremacist. He believed in the supremacy of the Aryan race. When people talk about Winston Churchill, they think that, woke liberals are trying to cancel this guy of his time. But he wasn't just a guy of his time. I think Boris Johnson himself, not many people know this, Boris Johnson himself has spoken about how absolutely abhorrent Winston Churchill's racial views were. It's not like a snowflake talking point. It's a genuine thing, but we don't talk about it. The portrayals of him in the media are overwhelmingly positive. Just a flawed, grumpy, wonderful old man who led us through the war. He was voted out by the men who'd come home from fighting, wasn't he, after the war? Which tells you something, I think. But we've still got this myth of we're this tiny, ridiculous country now. Since we've left the European Union, we're just this little country on our own, still trying to throw our weight around. We're not ready. I don't think we could cope, because so much of our identity and what the current government and the people in charge exist from is this feeling that we're better, that we know more. Even Keir Starmer's Labour does this. They're nowhere near as bad as the Tories, of course. But even they lean on the patriotism. We are the arbiters of moral good in the world. Let's lean on our proud British history. I'm not saying there's nothing to be proud of in Britain, but I'm saying that there's nothing we have to be realistic about our history if we want to move forward, otherwise things will keep repeating. I remember Jeremy Corbyn wanted us to teach about empire in our curriculum. That's still something that we don't do. People don't know, and this obviously leads to situations like today. It really does, because and when I talk about this in media, people say, you're just trying to make a big deal out of nothing, but it's all connected to each other. It's all connected. It's a conditioning from when we're young. We are radicalised, all of us, from a young age, to think of us as being this benevolent, wonderful, keep calm, carry on nation. We had a lot of fascists here. There were a lot of views that Winston Churchill would have agreed with Adolf Hitler on. Certainly Winston Churchill didn't win us the war. The war was won by mostly ordinary working class people who sacrificed, gave their lives, and are now used today. These men who lost their lives and are now used today to further facilitate sending more innocent, usually working class people into wars that aren't for the safety of people, which are for money and for gain and for power. We couldn't handle these conversations in the UK. If you try and talk about these things in Britain, I should say Britain, sorry, not the UK, but you can't handle these conversations because we're not even ready to address that stuff. And it's frustrating. It's beyond frustrating. It's heartbreaking, because it leads to the same cycle. And I'm sorry to get so off topic here, but this isn't a situation of we are the good guys here. I wish it was. I wish that if we ever engaged in war, I myself am quite anti-war. I'm very, very suspicious of NATO. There's so much money to be made. I'm reading some really amazing books about this, about the money made by our arms industry in this country is incredibly corrupt. If you look, we sell our weapons to the highest bidder. We sell to Saudi Arabia. We have a hand in what's going on in Yemen. If you look at the corruption in these places like Elbit, BAE. Oh, Dan's just seen the news. He's at work. I messaged him. I didn't really know how to let him know. By the way, Putin's just invaded Ukraine. So, poor Dan's. If you're new, if this is your first video I'm seeing from me, Dan is my little brother and my best friend and the light of my whole life, by the way. He's an actor. You can check out his stuff. I'll probably put it in the description box. But, if you look at BAE and their actions, their contracts, what they actually do, the suffering that is caused by all these people, you know, these corrupt, it's only just coming out, but of course it's trying to be silenced. If you look at what happens to Julian Assange, you know, he told us the truth. You know, he released information about war crimes and death, and now he is in prison, right? He has lost his liberty, and people like Tony Blair and George Bush are just walking around freely. All the people from these weapons companies are out there, you know, having their wine and making their nice salaries and feeling great, and essentially the weapons they've worked on are killing innocent people. I don't know how they can live like that. I honestly don't understand it. I think I just can't understand it. I'm not saying that for effect. How on earth can these people sleep at night? How does Tony Blair sleep at night? How do the people... It's a big chain of people. You know, I can understand the need for defending. I can understand that. But how can anyone in good conscience sit there and work on a weapon and just not know who it's going to be used by? And then with the knowledge, because these people are intelligent people. They have the ability to think, well, who's going to be using this? What is my work being used on here? You know? It's sick. There's so many opportunities in society. You know, they always say, don't they, before these things happen, they say it about Hitler. Why did no one stop him at the time? And I studied this. I was going to write a novel around that time period, about Munich, actually, in that time period. I researched it so much, and it got to a point where after I'd done my first draft, I actually thought I probably wasn't even best placed to write the story I wanted to tell. But the knowledge I gained from all that research over a number of years of how it happens, how fascism rises. This isn't just Putin. You know, obviously, Putin's been doing his own evil stuff. We've been seeing it rise here too. You know, we've enabled all this stuff to happen. Look at the treatment of Jeremy Corbyn. Anyone who, like, there were several, I think there were 26 MPs who were critical of NATO. Boris Johnson suggested that Keir Starmer remove the whip from them because that's what they love to do. It works for Keir Starmer because he's a coward and he just wants to be rid of the left. Also, he's one of the... He's very pally with the Iraq law. And they know, all these people in power, the reason they don't want us to know this stuff is because if we start, you know, looking into it, they're all done for. We will find out about how deep the corruption lies. Look at the people, you know, the very, very big person in BAE Systems donating to Keir Starmer's campaign, for example. Priti Patel's little secret holidays off to Israel, which she was supposed to declare, I believe, and then she said, oh, it was just a holiday. Sure. You know, this is an industry for us. We have to remember war is an industry. That's not, and when I say that, I'm not saying that that war is something that is always wrong. I mean, morally, in my heart, I feel like it, you know, I'm a Christian, I am a Christian, and I don't believe in war, but I do believe in defence, and I also believe in the right of the oppressed people to defend themselves and their families. 100%. I could never demand anything other. You know, it wouldn't be fair. I think that when we look at Palestine, when you look at what's happening to Palestine, especially with social media, when you see what's going on, and then you'll have some rockets being fired out of Palestine, which are so easily got rid of by Israel's technology, which is very advanced, the Iron Dome. And remember that these people are being held in basically an open-air prison. There's checkpoints. They can't. There's nothing they can do. There's so many people. I think like half the population of Palestine, in Gaza, are children. You know, it's an incredibly awful way for them to live. And some individuals fire rockets. And I'm not sitting here saying, oh, it's good to fire rockets at people. I'm very anti the idea of weaponry, like, until, you know, unless it's the last resort. But the evil that is involved in us from a distance, you know, even then, saying, well, that makes it an even war, serves them right, really. Oh, it's a terrible war between Israel and Palestine. They must stop fighting each other. And it's ridiculous when you think about us in Britain. What we would do to defend ourselves. We sent ships out about fishing disputes in France. Are you telling me that if someone actually occupied us today, that we wouldn't take I'm sorry, we wouldn't have anyone who fired anything back? And would that invalidate the general cause? Like, oh, okay, then I guess the occupation is just a difficult subject we should stay away from because some of the occupied people are fighting back and that's not good. It doesn't make sense. We have to remember in this that, and when I say this, I'm not pro-Putin. They're trying to say that people are somehow pro-Putin, which is ridiculous because Putin is pretty much everything I despise, really. And he has that in common. He has that in common with our current government and the American government too, actually. It's weird. You know, he does. Don't be fooled. We're not going to ever be taken into a war because we want to do what's right. When in history have we? We do not have a history of going to war to do what is right on the world stage. we will go in to defend ourselves and to defend our allies. And that's also not out of loyalty. It's out of a sense of we have mutually beneficial relationships with these people. The world runs based on money and power and capitalism. And we are a huge contributor to that whole system. You know, we have to look today. We think of ourselves as centrists. Annoy me because, you know, their idea of Britain, oh, we're queuing and we're so polite and oh, we're just so humble. And no, I mean, that's not. I don't know. Some of these people, it's not their fault. They don't know. They don't come from mixed families. I remember, you know, I know mum, it was an education for my mum because she came from quite a middle class white family, well, white and Jewish family mixed, and then married my dad, who was a working class Indian immigrant. And, you know, her worldview suddenly expanding. And now she is, my mum's quite brilliant actually, because now she is the biggest Winston Churchill auntie. You know, she's fantastic. She learns a lot. It's not because I think, you know, I'm not saying that the people here who don't have an opportunity to know that stuff are bad people. It's just that our government doesn't want us to know. You know, our schools don't want us to know these things. They don't want us to see ourselves as also have been committing evil. You know, they want us to be the good guys. They don't ever want us to turn and say, actually, we might have more in common. For example, our hearts might have more in common with the Palestinian people. Even those of them that are, oh, scary Muslims, oh, far away. We might actually have more in common with them than our own government. Oppressed people around the world, for no matter what reason they're being oppressed, they share a sort of brotherhood. They don't want us to think about that. So I would just say, going into this, I'm very wary of this, because just because we're doing the right thing in terms of we're against Russia, and you know, Russia has no right to invade Ukraine. You can't just invade a country, and I stand by that. I stand by that across the globe. It doesn't matter who does it. It's wrong when we do it and when we have done it. Like, and I say that. And for saying that, as someone who's mixed race, I get told to go back to India. I get told I'm not British. I get sent hate mail, kill yourself, all that kind of awful stuff, which is quite difficult to deal with. It shouldn't be about allies. It shouldn't be about our friends. You know, these situations have to be done based on what's right. And I don't believe our government will ever do this based on what's right. We will do what is best for us in our best interests, not the moral interests, the interests of humanity in general. Because otherwise, if we cared about occupation, if we cared about these things, we would be helping Palestine. We would be helping them. I'm not saying, you know, oh, go in and invade, you know, but I'm saying we aren't even doing BDS, which is boycott, divestment and sanctions for Palestine, who are an occupied country, who've been occupied for a very long time, who are being ethnically cleansed, essentially. The Amnesty International report, you know, basically pointed out what we all kind of known and that Palestinians were telling us, which is that apartheid is happening there. It's great evil that's going on. And partly facilitated by us. You know, I don't actually think that the evil is the state of Israel necessarily. I think that Europe, the way we treated Jewish people fleeing during that war, it honestly doesn't surprise me. If you look at history in a chain, I try to look at it like that. And I try and look at people like that too. You know, nothing comes from nothing. If you look at things in a chain, of course, if you have a people that are absolutely terrified, that are being killed in the most horrific way possible, being treated as inhuman, and your supposed European friends and countries won't even take you in when you're refugees, obviously, you know, I can completely sympathise with that. Of course, you know, I think I'd probably think to myself, I don't feel safe here, I want somewhere else. And then obviously we were controlling Palestine at that time, and so another community was then sacrificed. And really it's because we didn't do enough. Like, we didn't do enough in Europe. What did we do? Seriously, we left the Jews to it. You know, we owe a great debt. Please don't ever think, if I criticise the state of Israel, and people do say this all the time, that it's because I'm in any way anti-Jewish. I'm really not. I think that, well, you know, I studied in great detail what has happened to the Jews historically, and you can trace that way back through Europe. You know, I actually think that probably the greatest evil in this situation is actually ourselves, really, if you trace it back. Because you've got Israel, you know, Israel was created because out of deep fear, a genuine fear as well. It wasn't even paranoia, it was a genuine fear. And unfortunately, I do think that people who experience oppression go one of two ways. They either ally with the oppressed, or they become so frightened that they're going to be oppressed that they start to oppress others. And that's just any community in the world. I think you see that in history. You see that in any... It's just a personality thing. I think it's a choice that we all make, which is certainly not specific to Israel. Certainly not. I mean, Look at us. We have done so much worse than Israel's ever done. Ever. So, but yeah, so I just think just be a bit wary about this, because we won't be making any decisions unless we feel personally at risk or we feel like our trade deals are at risk. It's not we don't jump into action because people are suffering. Just look at our action. We don't do that. We smeared a man, Jeremy Corbyn and people like him, as cranks, as loonies, because they were anti-war, because they called this stuff out. Jeremy Corbyn was calling this stuff out 4 years ago. He has a very established history of saying these things many years before they turn out to be 100% correct. And everyone looking back and wondering, oh, why didn't we listen at the time? So people don't learn. People do not learn. But anyway, this is just a reaction talkie video. I don't have knowledge about it. I've been praying this morning, and I keep praying for the people of Ukraine and the people of Russia. We don't want a war. We do not want a war. Anything to stop war. There mustn't be war. Horrifying, the speech that the president of Ukraine made, saying that he wants blood donations. He wants people who are trained to sign up. I pray we're not heading for a war. But we might be. And I think it's going to become very complicated because of the internal politics of various countries, our internal politics. And it's going to become a very difficult time. We've already seen as well the treatment of those who criticise NATO. I am anticipating the whole traitor narrative of those who criticise Britain to become even worse in the future. And I am anticipating it becoming a situation of you are pro our military or pro Russia, pro us or pro Putin. And I don't know if it's going to be very easy for people whose answer is I am pro our actions, our decision in this context, but I'm not pro our military, and I'm deeply, deeply sceptical of what's going on. And why? Because I don't believe it's based on compassion for the people of Ukraine at all. I don't believe it is. I really don't believe it is. But anyway, I love you loads. Sorry, this is long and the sound will be absolutely awful. I hope you're all right. I'm praying that this can just calm down and everything will be all right, but I just don't know. I think we're too warmongering. I think we make a great deal of money out of war, don't we? And it does frighten me. As we saw in the Second World War, these things come out of periods of economic instability. A hatred is grown towards a specific group who's blamed. I think we can see that happening with Muslims here, for us anyway. And I think you can see that around the world. The ingredients are all there. We've had austerity, now COVID. We're having asylum seekers and refugees being described as flooding in as if they're trying to take over. Anything to direct us away from the corruption at the top of the Tory party and the top of the current Labour Party, who's just part of the same system now. Opposition's pretty much been smeared to nothing. The left has gone. And it's a horrible, horrible time to be in. So I hope you stay strong and keep hold of your voices and don't feel afraid to speak, and that you hold compassion for all your fellow human beings, no matter where they're from. And just pray that even those that are committing these terrible crimes, committing these terrible atrocities, I pray that something in them will wake up and think, you know what, I'm a human being, and I don't want to inflict harm on other human beings. That's not me. That's not what I want to do. That's not my legacy. I don't want to cause harm to innocent people. And I hope there are enough good people in the world, and maybe social media will help us. I hope there are enough good people in the world, there's enough solidarity that we can just decide that as human beings we've got to find a way to work together, and we must be rid of these capitalists, these men who are so obsessed with military power, with modern day empire. I don't know, we've got more in common with the oppressed across the world. I don't feel loyal to any nation. I don't feel loyal to, people have said this to people have, it's probably not a good thing for me to say, especially because of the Preacher Patel's proposed police bills and statelessness, etc. Me being mixed race, me falling into that very category of being someone who's at risk, because my dad is from the Punjab and my brother and I fall into that time period that puts us at risk. But I don't feel loyalty to Britain. I don't feel loyalty to any, do you feel loyalty to a foreign power? No, I feel a loyalty to the oppressed people worldwide, and just to people and to humanity. Doesn't matter religion, doesn't matter where they are. I don't feel any particular loyalty to Britain just because I'm here. I feel lucky to be here because we have a lot of freedoms, but those freedoms were hard won, and they were hard won from the sort of people that even to this day are still hurting. People of this country creating austerity, creating poverty. They are not the great heroes. The great heroes of this nation were those who protested, who at the time were completely demeaned and treated like outcasts and, called crazy to give us the rights that we now have. Those are the good people, and those are the people that I stand with and I ally myself with. So it's a horrible situation, but I just wanted to record some sort of reaction to this, what's going on, because it might be important later on. I don't know what's going to happen. I hope and pray that I'll be able to make a video later to say it's all died down, it's fine. But I don't expect that. I love you loads. Please be safe. And even if you're watching this because you hate me and you're a hate watcher, I do love you, and I have compassion for you as a person. And, we might disagree on things, but I think we share a love between us, all of us in humanity. We love our families, we love our friends, and we just have to remember that everyone in this world has that capacity, I think, within them. We're not so different from one another. We're really not. It's awful. Okay, I love you loads, and I'll see you really soon. Bye.